Shalom everyone, and thank you for joining me. A new book, Sefer Shmot, the book of Exodus. And today I would like to talk about morality, humanity, and the midwives. Today we're going to try to understand who are those midwives, Shifra and Puah. Were they Jewish? Were they Egyptians? What can we learn from the different commentators? And what are the lessons that we can take to our own lives? So let's start from the narrative. The Torah states, ויאמר מלך מצרים למיילדות העבריות, and Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, told למיילדות העבריות. Now, in Hebrew, you will immediately pick up on it that, okay, Rega, 1 second. Are the midwives are Jewish, or the midwives that allow or help the Hebrew women to give birth? So it's very ambiguous. And obviously there is a reason for this ambiguity, because I think it opens up a discussion. But let's continue. אשר שם האחת שפרה ושם השנית פועה. The name of the first one is Shifra and the second one is Puah. ויאמר, בילדכן את העבריות. So Pharaoh says to them, when you give birth to the Hebrew women, וראיתן על האובניים, and you will see on the birth stool, אם בן הוא, if it's a boy, והמיתם אותו. You should kill him. ואם בת היא, and if it's a girl, וחיה, it's okay. ותראינה מילדות את האלוקים ולא עשו כאשר דיבר עליהן מלך מצרים, ותחיינה את הילדים. So the midwives somehow saw a revelation, or God talked to them, and they disobeyed Pharaoh. The first one to disobey Pharaoh were the midwives. And they gave life to those children. So the king of Egypt obviously understood that it's not working. ויקרא מלך מצרים למיילדות ויאמר להן מדוע עשיתן הדבר הזה? Why did you do that? Can you imagine? You're being summoned to the king, and the king says to you, I told you to do something, why didn't you? So they came up with a very interesting excuse. They say, look, ותאמרנה מילדות את פרעה, look, we are the midwives, and we are telling you as professionals. לא נשים כי לא כנשים המצריות העבריות. There is a distinct difference between the Egyptian women and the Hebrew women. What is the difference? כי חיות הנה. בטרם תבוא אליהן המילדת וילדו. They don't really need us. You asked us to be there at the time of the birth, so when we see that this is a male comes out, so we will kill him. And they will not be able to see, but we are too late. They, the Hebrew women, are already so quick in the delivery, so when we come, if we will kill the baby boy, it's already out, so they will call us murderers. So that's not what you asked us to do, so we cannot fulfill your decree. Interesting. ויתב אלוקים למיילדות, וירב העם ויעצמו מאוד. So, not only that Pharaoh failed in the execution of his decree, Am Israel, the nation of Israel, grew. So he decided, you know what, enough with the midwives. I'm making a decree which is very clear and very public. ויצב פרעה לכל עמו לאמור. Now Paro does not go to the midwives, he goes to the entire people. He sends messages to every Egyptian person. כל הבן הילוד היורה תשליכו וכל הבת תחיון. I don't care. I'm not going to hide it. I asked the midwives to do it in a private matter. When they deliver the baby on the birth stool, so they basically will choke the baby and they will take him out dead, and they will say, I'm sorry, and no one will know. But you know what? They can't do it. They can't deliver on it. So you know what? Let's just kill them. You see how Paro, how vicious he was. At the beginning, he tried to hide this terrible thing to kill baby boys. And at the end, he just didn't care about it. He made it public. He made it known. Yes, I don't have any problems to kill the baby boys. And I'm asking each Egyptian to participate. So we're not going to talk about the evolution of the decree. I want to focus on the midwives. So who were they? So Philo, who lived in Alexandria in the 1st century, which according to many, he is what we will call pre-Chazal pre-Torah Shebe'al Peh in terms of the editing of it, meaning sometimes he says things that Chazal later on say it, which is very interesting. So Philo suggested the following: המילדות היו מצריות ולא יהודיות. The midwives were Egyptians. They were not Jewish. פרעה ויועציו העלו רעיון לא מוסרי לרצוח את התינוקות הזכרים, ופרעה ציווה להשאיר את הנקבות. So he says, Pharaoh and his advisors basically raised up an idea that was totally immoral, to murder the baby boys and to leave the baby girls. הסיבה לכך היא שבגלל טבעם הרך של הנקבות הן לא יהיו חיילות ולא ילחמו נגדו. This is incredible insight. So, why do you think Paro said, okay, you know what, the baby girls, they are okay. What, he liked that the Am Israel will grow? Exactly the opposite. So you could think that he says, you know what, if there will be no boys, those girls will marry Egyptians, and then the Jewish people or the Hebrew nation will disappear. Philo says that Paro was worried about what? About some kind of an inner revolution, inner rebellion against him. So he says, if there are too many Jewish baby boys, they will be soldiers and they will fight me. So the girls will not fight me. So that's what he wanted. Now, this is something very interesting. According to Philo, the midwives were Egyptians, and they disobeyed their king. What does that mean? It means that they could not tolerate the idea to murder babies, to do something so immoral, because Pharaoh's fears and anxieties. You have here someone, and according to Philo, it's a very interesting idea. The midwives had morality, had ethics. They refused to participate in something that was so immoral and unethical. However, Targum Onkelos says, Lechaita Yehudiata, Deshumchada Shifra Veshumtinyata Pu'a. He says, no, the midwives were Jewish. The midwives were Hebrew, from the Hebrew nation. The name of the first one is Shifra, and the second one is Pu'a. Which means Onkelos says, no, he didn't go to the Egyptian midwives. They will probably do it. He went to the Jewish midwives. Targum Yonatan said, ואמר פרעה, דמך אב חמי בחלמה, והכל קיימה ערא דמצרים קיימה בכף מודן אחדה, וטליה בר אימרתה בכף מודן אחדה, ואב וקרא כף מודנה מטליה בגבה מיnyad. So, Targum Yonatan elaborates on what exactly motivated Pharaoh to come up with this immoral, unethical decree. He says he had a dream. And the dream was that the entire land of Egypt is on one side of the scale, and then there is a little child, a little boy, who basically tipped the scale. And the land of Egypt is gone. So he went to his counselors and the interpreters of his dreams, and they told him, you know, in the future there is going to be a baby boy, a Jewish baby boy, who is going to lead a rebellion against you. And he's going to destroy the land of Egypt. Ooh. Pharaoh was terrified. Pharaoh said, my dreams will come true. So what do I need to do? I need to kill every Jewish boy. So none of them, not even one of them, will survive to rebel against me. So therefore, what did he do? Uvegin ken, and because of that, התייעת פרעה דמצרים לחייתה, מלכה דמצרים לחייתה יהודייתה. דשמה חדה שפרה היא יוכבת, ושמה דתנייתה פועה היא מרים ברתה. So now, says Yonatan ben Uziel, which is Targum Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem translation, basically says, Paro was motivated by that dream. It basically haunted him. He says, I dreamt that the enemy of Egypt is a baby boy, is a Jewish baby boy, so I cannot allow it to happen. I need to kill every Jewish boy in order to save Egypt. So he calls the Jewish midwives, which he gives them the names Yocheved and Miriam. Yocheved, it's Moses' mom, and Miriam, that's his sister. And he called them to execute his decree. And they refused. Now, I will just say one thing, that we know that it's a bit hard in terms of the chronological order or the history to say that Miriam was a midwife. We know that Aaron was 3 years older than Moshe. Miriam was not that old. So it's a little hard to know how old exactly she was when she became a midwife, but maybe she just helped her mother. So then, the Rashbam, that's Rashi's grandson, says למילדות העבריות. What does it mean למילדות העבריות? למילדות שהן עבריות. So he disagreed with Philo and says, no, the midwives are Hebrew. They are Hebrew women. They are Jewish women. They are not Egyptian. However, the Ibn Ezra says the following. ויאמר מלך מצרים למילדות. So he says, שרות היו על כל המילדות. כי אין ספק, כי יותר מ-500 מילדות היו. אלא, אלו שתיהן, שרות היו עליהן לתת מס למלך מהשכר. So what does that mean? The Ibn Ezra says, first, don't think that there were only 2 midwives. We're talking about millions of people. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of baby boys and baby girls. So, the midwives had almost like a union. They were the group of midwives. And these 2 were the leaders. So Paro asked them to send the message to all the midwives to tell them that's what you need to do. And also, they will give taxes. They will pay taxes to Paro for every delivery. If for every delivery they received $100, so they will give some to Paro. וככה ראיתי היום במקומות רבות. So the Ibn Ezra says, I also saw this custom, that midwives are getting paid and they need to give taxes to the king. So what does that mean? It means that Paro, he didn't really take the time to speak to every meyaledet, to every midwife. He ordered the leaders and he asked them to execute his decree, but they refused. Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, from the 13th century in France, says the following. ויאמר מלך מצרים למילדות, לאותן שמילדות את העבריות. For those midwives who help the Hebrew women to give birth. ומסתמה, and probably, גם הם עבריות היו. אף הפסוק משמע שהמילדות עבריות, אשר שם האחת שפרה, הזכיר הקדוש ברוך הוא שמם לכבודם שתזכרנה לטוב, כי שמו נפשם בכפם על ישראל לעבור מצוות המלך. Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor says that we are talking about probably Hebrew midwives. And why do we need to know their names? Because they basically were willing to sacrifice their lives for those Jewish boys. It is really amazing to see that Paro was not upset or sad or angry with these 2 midwives. They just tell him, look, you are wrong. You don't know how it works. When we come, they already give birth. And Paro is like, okay, so I'm going to change my decree. In a way, what they did, they knew that if he would look into it, he would know that they are not saying the truth. But they were willing to do it in order to save those boys. And in a miracle way, Paro did not investigate them too much. He says, you know what? Okay, leave me alone with you. I'm going to go public. I'm going to go to my entire nation and tell them, you go after the Jewish boys. So let's pause here for a second. We see that we have a dispute between the commentators, where the midwives were Jewish or Hebrews or not. And it obviously reflects on, I would call it the courage. If you're talking about midwives that were not Jewish, so they did something incredible for a nation that they don't know. Maybe they felt that they will betray their profession by doing so. Or maybe they just saw, look, it's immoral, it's unethical, I don't want to have any part of it. And now if they were Hebrews, so it's more justified in terms of they were willing to do it, something for obviously for their people, but the courage to do it, to defile what Paro asked them to do, very courageous. But take a look at the Abarbanel. Rabbi Yitzchak Don Abarbanel from the 15th century in Spain says the following: ולא היו עבריות, definitely they were not Hebrews. The midwives were not Jewish, very much like Philo from the 1st century. כי איך יפתח ליבו בנשים העבריות שימיתו ולדיהן? Because it's impossible to say that they were Jewish. What, Paro will trust the Jewish midwives to do what he asked them to do, to kill Jewish boys? Come on. Obviously you need to say that they were not Jewish. אבל היו מצריות, מיילדות את העבריות. Those midwives were Egyptians, and they helped the Hebrew women to give birth. רצה לומר, עוזרות אותן ללדת, כמו שכתוב בילדיכן את העבריות. And now the Abarbanel says, והנה, and now, המיילדות ההנה, these midwives, these non-Jewish midwives, עם היותן מצריות, even though they were Egyptians, יראו את האלוקים, they were God-fearing women. ולא עשו דבר ממה שציווה אותן מלך מצרים, and they didn't do a thing from what Paro told them, עד שהוא הוכיחן עליו, until he basically summoned them and rebuked them, and they said, we cannot do anything. According to the Abarbanel, you basically see that you have a group of women, not Jewish, not Israelites, not Hebrews, that will not agree with an evil decree. They will stand up, even though the risk for their profession, for their life, for their families, everything is at risk. But they will not participate in something that is so unjust and immoral. In a way, you can see that the commentators are struggling. Who are they? Hebrews or Egyptians? And therefore it also reflects on what? On, if I say that they were Egyptians, I'm basically saying that, yeah, even those Egyptians, they could not tolerate injustice and immorality. Not only the Hebrews I can understand. They will not kill their own babies, even if their lives will be at risk. It's very courageous, but I can understand it even more. But with the Egyptians, with someone who is not from that nation, to be able to stand up against the king, this is something admirable. The Ramban, he basically tried to understand what was going on in Pharaoh's mind. And he says the following: הבה נתחכמה לו. Let's outsmart the people of Israel. לא ראה פרעה וחכמי יועציו להכותם בחרב, כי תהיה בגידה גדולה להכות חינם, העם אשר באו בארץ במצוות המלך הראשון. Basically, the Ramban says, well, no, he asked the question, why is, if Pharaoh basically hates the Jews, he hates these Hebrew people who are in his country, kill them. Take a sword, kill them all, wage a war against them and destroy them. Why do you need to come up with all sorts of things? So the Ramban says, you can't do that. Don't forget, this nation came with an invitation. The first king invited Yaakov's family to come. And those people, the Hebrews, the nation of Israel, are the descendants of Yaakov and his family. So therefore, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of, international relationships, Pharaoh felt he can't just go ahead and wipe them out. וגם עם הארץ לא ייתנו רשות למלך לעשות חמאס כזה. כי עמהם הוא מתייעץ. ואף כי בני ישראל עם רב ועצום ויעשו עמהם מלחמה גדולה. And also he says, I don't think, says the Ramban, that the Egyptian people will allow him to do that. And also there was some kind of fear that, the people of Israel are not that small. They grew and they had a lot of kids. So maybe Paro felt that they can really fight against him. So this is why he didn't wage a full war against Am Israel. So therefore, what did he do? אבל אמר שיעשו דרך חוכמה, שלא ירגישו ישראל כי באיבה יעשו בהם, ולכך הטיל בהם מס, כי דרך הגרים בארץ להעלות מס למלך כמו שבא בשלמה. So what does he do? First, financial decrease, more taxation. You are only guests here, you need to pay. Pay for your land, pay for your water, pay for my water, pay for my land, pay for everything that you do. So first, financial decrease. After the financial decrease, ציווה בסתר למיילדות, להרוג הזכרים על האבנים, ואפילו היולדות עצמם לא ידעו בהם. Says the Ramban, Paro created a conspiracy, or created, a plot, and how to execute it in a way that at the beginning you don't feel it. At the beginning it's just taxation. If you go to every other country, you will do the same. If you are not an Egyptian, you need to pay for being here. Okay, paying. Then he wanted to kill their boys, their baby boys. How? But doing that in a way that the woman who gives birth does not see it. And then they will not know that they are really after them. So everything was hidden. That's what Paro tried to do at the beginning. Because he knew he cannot go public. But after he was so frustrated that it doesn't work, he basically was able, I guess with a propaganda and by manipulation, to lead his people to participate in one of the most horrific things in history. Go after baby boys and kill them. Shadal suggested that לדעתי המיילדות האלו לא היו מצריות ממש. He said, I don't think they were really Egyptians, אלא מארץ גושן שהייתה קרובה לארץ כנען, but rather they came from Goshen, who was a city between the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, and Egypt. וקרוב שהיו מדברות שפת כנען, ושמותן כנענים ועבריים. He suggested that they were not Egyptians, but they were not Jewish either. So we have a third way. If Philo and Abarbanel says, definitely Egyptian midwives, and others says, no, Jewish midwives, Shadal says they are not Egyptians, they are not Jewish. They are somewhere in the middle. Different country, different nation. And it's also interesting because on one hand you will say, if they are not Egyptians, they would like to find favor in the eyes of the king. And they have nothing to do with the Hebrews. At the same time, maybe because of their proximity to the land of Israel, they felt a little bit more connected to the Hebrew nation. So you basically take a status of a group of midwives that are not here and not there, and also they show tremendous responsibility for their values and not participate in this mass murder. Rav Soloveitchik has a very interesting insight into this idea of the midwives. And he says the following. If it is a son, you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, she may live. Why did Pharaoh relegate the task of killing the male infants to the Jewish midwives? So he explained that these Jewish midwives. Why did he not order his own people to kill the Jewish males? A tactic employed by our enemies to oppress the Jews through generations has been to discredit them, to argue that this nation does not deserve the world's sympathy. During the Holocaust, the Nazis forcibly took Jews to an elegant hotel in Warsaw had them dressed in festive clothing, loaded the tables with the delicates, hired an orchestra, and forced the Jews to dance. All the while, a Nazi photographer took photo of them. Afterwards, they were immediately sent to the death camps. After the war, it was discovered that the Nazi had planned to disseminate the pictures to demonstrate how Jews callously ignored the suffering of their brethren, even celebrating while their co-religionists were going slaughtered. The method was originated by Pharaoh. Pharaoh wanted to show the world that the Jews were not worthy of sympathy. See how their own midwives, whose job has to bring children into the world and alleviate the pain of the mothers, kill the children. He wanted to show that the world would be better off without such people. This is a very strong and powerful interpretation of Rav Soloveitchik, which as obviously there is a lot of histosophia, which means to, in a way, re-elaborate the history and to learn from history. But Rav Soloveitchik basically says Pharaoh went to the Jewish midwives, even though it defiles any logic. Why? Do you think that Jews will do it to other Jews? Says Pharaoh, yes. Those people, they are not worthy of your sympathy. They do it to themselves. I will have couples. I will have Jews to basically monitor and control other Jews, and you will see that they will do it successfully. But he was wrong. He was really wrong. Those midwives, those two women, these two courageous women stood up against Paro. They couldn't tell him, you are wrong, you are evil, because then that will be probably the last words that they will say. So they created a manipulation, a deception. Look, they don't really need us. When we come, it's too late. So they didn't confront evil directly, but indirectly, they did not execute his decree. They violated his decree. Paro had to do it by himself. You will not see Jews betray other Jews. Rav Soloveitchik, in a very interesting insight, says that Paro wanted really to show that the Jews are not who they are. They don't care about each other. They don't try to help each other. Exactly the opposite. But he was wrong. He was wrong, thinking that by going to those midwives and maybe promising them all sorts of things, they will betray their nation and their values. Edmund Burke says it in one sentence. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I would say men or women, obviously. These two midwives, and especially if they were not Jewish, when they stood up against Paro, they did not allow that evil to come out. Evil and evil people always try to push the envelope and to see when there is going to be a reaction. And when there is no reaction, they continue to push and in a way make things that were awful accepted. People start believing that maybe that's the right thing to do. Because the silent majority is too silent. Instead of standing up and say, this is wrong, this is evil, they are silent. And then when they are silent, this extreme group of evil are pushing more and more and more. And that's how Paro was able to do what he did to the Hebrew nation, that his predecessor invited them and basically used their talent to build this empire called Egypt. Where was Egypt without Joseph? Where was Egypt without Yaakov? Where was Egypt without the people of Israel? Nowhere to be found. The problem was that people forget it. That's how it started. Paro did not remember Joseph. Paro did not remember anything that was done for him and for his nation. And he was able to convince his nation that they are evil. And therefore, if they are evil, we can destroy them. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. So the midwives tried. But after them, no one else stood up against evil. נחמה ליבוביץ' said, נראה יותר הפירוש שהמיילדות היו מצריות. He says, I think that the midwives were really Egyptians. במיוחד לאור פירוש הרמב"ן לפסוקים הנ"ל. התורה מתארת לנו כיצד יכול כל אדם לעצור עוולה. נחמה says, the Torah describes to us how every person can stop evil in injustice. הכלי לעצור עוולה הוא האחריות המוסרית שלו. You know how, if you see injustice, if you see evil, you know how can you stop it? By being responsible for your moral and ethic code. המבחן אם יש יראת אלוקים או לא תלויה בהתנהגות למיעוט, לחלש ולמסכן. The test, the trial, to see if you are a God-fearing person, it's in the way you treat the weak, the person who is defenseless. What do you do with them? If you defend them, if you protect them, or you take advantage of them? That's the test. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says the following. Morality is the voice of human dignity. It is what makes a society human and civilization possible. A society without moral codes would be a place where individuals pursue their own interests without regard to others, leading inevitably to conflict, chaos, and ultimately the breakdown of community. This is so to the point. Morality is not just being nice. It's just not to hold a sign. It's to understand that if each one of us will do whatever he or she thinks this is right, it will create a conflict, a chaos, and a breakdown of our society. A society must have moral codes. A society must understand that we need to take care of each other. A society must understand that we need to somehow integrate, to intertwine, to combine different interests, different agendas with moral code, with clear moral code, to know exactly what is evil and what is not, what is just and what is unjust, what is moral and what is immoral. The Torah gives us the tools for that. And also, a true human being. We all know sometimes when non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust, when they were interviewed and they were asked, why did you do that? You risk yourself, you risk your family to save strangers. Why did you do that? And the answer was, what would you think? I will not do it? How would I be able to look at myself in the mirror when there is a person who is being chased and being hunted for no reason, just because he is a Jew? That was immoral, that was evil, that was unjust. I couldn't stand aside and silent. There is evil in the world. There is a lot of evil in the world. And we, as people, must understand that we must not allow that evil to triumph. So it means that we need to stand up. It means that we need to stand up against this evil and to say no more. We need to show that morality is a voice of human dignity. It what makes us as a society, human and civilization possible. And it is the only thing necessary to stop triumph is for good men and women to do something. Thank you.